Jo Crusoe has been teaching since 2002. After various teaching and management roles in London schools, she started working at the prestigious Wimbledon School of English in 2013 and has been Director of Studies there since 2018. And today, Jo is going to talk to us about the role of English, the English language teacher, in preparing students for a global world. And I love the title of this talk. So over to you, Jo. Thank you.
All right, so hi everyone. As Rose said, my name's Jo. So a little bit more about who I am, perhaps. So first of all, as she said, I'm the Director of Studies at Wimbledon School of English. And I have to say I'm really fortunate to work at such a forward-thinking school where we're able to kind of look at different issues and we don't feel too restricted by perhaps perceptions in the industry. And, you know, we're trying to always kind of be a little bit ahead of the game. And yeah, so it's a really great place to work. As well as that, I'm a Londoner. I was privileged to grow up in a very multicultural, very liberal, very open society. And that's become a part of who I am. So I guess I bring that to the industry, and I think many of us bring something similar. Also, I'm a gay woman. I'm out and proud. And I think this is a really key point because I'm out and proud in pretty much every aspect of my life with all my friends, my family. The only place that I'm not is in the classroom. And in 2020, in London, as I said, one of the most liberal cities in the world, I don't think that's right. And I think that there needs to be something changed about that situation. So the focus of my talk, although I'm talking in general about exporting tolerance, I will have more of a focus of LGBTQIA+ issues because that's where my experiences mainly come from. However, as you can possibly tell from my surname, I am non-British, if you like. I was born and raised in London, but my surname is not British. Actually, my full surname is Kroussaniotakis, which is quite long, quite difficult to say. It's quite difficult to spell. I couldn't actually spell it until I was 8. And it labels me very definitely as somebody with a non-British heritage. So I've certainly experienced othering. I've not experienced discrimination at all, but I've certainly experienced othering. I've had that but where are you really from question quite often coming up in my life. So I'll be touching on, although as I said, it's mainly going to be with a focus on LGBTQ issues, I will be touching a little bit on race and gender and other issues of discrimination. But what's this all about? What's the point of my talk? It's called Exporting Tolerance, but perhaps not too clear. And I think obviously this whole conference has been about queerness and race and issues of diversity and prejudice, and I'm hoping to bring a slightly perhaps more positive spin than we can often feel very disheartening to be a queer person, a person of colour in the ELT industry. So I'm hoping to perhaps put a little bit more positive spin on that. So I'm going to start out by talking about why we need to raise the issues in ELT, why it's important for ourselves and for our students and for the world around us, why we need to be talking about this. I'll also be particularly focusing on the effect and what's the point really of raising issues and perhaps highlighting them in class. And finally, I'm going to be looking at how we can put that into action. What are some things we can do? Now, a lot of this will have already been covered during the conference. Many people will have spoken far more articulately about many of these issues than I will. So I feel like I'm kind of summarizing a lot of the points that have been raised. So let's start off with thinking about why do we need to be talking about queerness in ELT? Well, first of all, ELT itself, we're so lucky to be working in such a global, such a diverse industry. I'm sure most of you will have friends and colleagues all around the world working in lots and lots of different contexts, lots of different cultures. And we're also incredibly lucky to be working in a very interconnected industry. We meet each other at conferences, we work together online, offline, we might travel to do different courses. Organizations such as IATEFL, I've got some of their advertising campaign here for recruitment, you know, encourage diversity, encourage interconnectedness. So shouldn't we be taking advantage of that? Isn't that part of the point of being in this industry, to experience the world in all of its wondrous variety and all of humanity? But more than that, more than just in ELT, we're everywhere. People of color are everywhere. LGBTQIA+, all the colors of the rainbow in between. We're everywhere. We're all around the world. We can't escape it. Our students can't escape it. And I don't think we should shy away from that. We're a part of humanity just as much as everyone else. So I just want to share a quick video with you to kind of demonstrate exactly how global we are. Oh, sorry.
NBC News.
So, you know, as you see, there are pride festivals all around the world. There are gay people all around the world. There's no escaping it. So given that that's true, don't we need to talk to our students about that? I think when we teach students, now I'm talking particularly here about students who travel to study. So students who come perhaps to the UK, to Canada, to Australia, New Zealand, Malta, Cyprus, the Netherlands. There are so many countries around the world where students will travel to that country to learn English or any language. So for those students who want to travel and want to learn English, don't we need to be teaching them about the international world, not just the language? Aren't we doing them a huge disservice if we don't provide them with all the tools that they need, not just to survive, but to thrive in an international world? They're going to meet a huge variety of people. If they're going to be studying, living, working in an English-speaking country, in what we might term a liberal Western country, though I think that definition is a bit debatable, then our students need to be prepared for that. And that's our role. We're teaching them about the international language. Also, we need to teach them about the international world. They'll have classmates in our own classes, or if they go to university, from very different backgrounds with very different cultures and attitudes. And so I think it's our responsibility to provide them with a safe environment where we don't just discuss language. They don't just have a chance to make mistakes in language before they go out into the wider world to use it, but also with other intercultural issues. You know, we've got to give them a chance to make those mistakes in a safe place so that they're prepared when they go out to be successful people in whatever field they choose to be in. So I think it's really our responsibility and our role to do that. And particularly if they're coming to a city like London, a country like the UK, or as I said, Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, so many countries where people go to learn English. Students are aware of what they're getting themselves into. They know what to expect. They know that we're a multicultural, liberal country. They're expecting to see different cultures. And honestly, a lot of the time, that's what they want. They don't want to be sheltered from the variety of cultures that you find in lots of metropolitan areas or any let's say Western culture. That's what they want. They want to be challenged. They want to experience different cultures and different ways of thinking. And I don't think we should be denying them that. You know, that's such an important part of the whole experience of traveling to study. If, you know, anyone who's traveled to another country, part of what you go there for is to understand what the people are like, why they're like that. So, you know, I don't think we need to be to mollycoddle our students so much when it comes to raising issues that we think perhaps they might not want to talk about. But in fact, I think the most compelling reason, to be honest, has to be the moral argument. It's a question of ethics. Who are we? If we don't highlight the issues that we think are important, if we don't stand up for the principles that we believe in, what does that say about us? We have, there are people around the world who are struggling and suffering exactly about these issues. And from our privileged positions, shouldn't we be part of the force of changing the world in that way? If we're thinking about people around the world, but also people in our classrooms, we will have students who are LGBTQIA. We will have students who are people of color, with disabilities, with any marginalized or groups who experience prejudice. We should be ensuring that no student experiences prejudice on our watch. Surely that's part of our role as a teacher, to protect the students, to protect the students from many things, but also from prejudice. And not just to keep them safe from prejudice, but to reflect them in our classroom. Our students all need to see themselves reflected. A lot of talk is around representation in ELT materials and how it's a very white middle class world, the ELT world. And that's so true. How many of our students don't fit into that format? And yet we constantly just present them with very heteronormative white examples. But more on that later. But another point which I think is quite interesting is, why are we focusing so much on those students from the perhaps more conservative countries who we feel might be offended or might shy away from talking about these issues? Why are we focusing on them? What about all the other students from, again, let's call them liberal Western democracies? What will they think of us if they see us very obviously not talking about the elephant in the room, the hidden issue of gay people and people of color in the ELT? So I think, we have to look at both sides. We want to protect people. Certainly there's commercial reasons, which have been discussed many times. But fundamentally, we've got to think about our student body as a whole, not just the ones we're a bit worried about. And I put the First They Came for the Communists poem up there because I think that's quite a visceral and important reminder of how important it is to speak up for the things that we believe are important. So I think there are a lot of really quite compelling reasons to highlight issues. And again, I'm talking mainly here about LGBTQ issues, but obviously issues of race and gender as well come into that. What is the point of it? If we make all this effort, and what actually happens as a result? Well, I think that something quite magical and quite important happens as a result. And this is where I'm hoping that I can leave you with perhaps a more positive message and a more positive view. I truly and fundamentally believe that as English language teachers, particularly with international multicultural classes, we are exporting tolerance. Sure, we're teaching English, we're facilitating intercultural communication, but fundamentally, I think what we're really doing here is we're exporting tolerance. Students come to us, we talk to them, they have many experiences, we open their minds, we challenge their beliefs, hopefully. They're exposed to a huge variety of cultures and different lifestyles, not just in the country that they're in, but also within the class that they're in. They make international friendships. They see lots of positive examples of a huge variety of different kinds of people. And the fundamental result of that, I honestly believe, is that they take those attitudes home with them. Those are fundamental changes. And when people change their attitude, that attitude spreads to those around them. They might influence their friends, their family, later on perhaps their employees. If they're teachers, maybe their students. If they're parents, perhaps their children. And slowly but surely, attitudes change. And again, I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more because I really think that this is a positive thing to think about. There's so much disheartening news and so much negativity about the state of human rights, gay rights, anti-discrimination laws. But actually, I think things are changing for the better, and we're going to look at that a little bit more in the future. But maybe you don't believe me. I've had a lot of skepticism leveled at me about this theory. I've been banging on about exporting tolerance for many years now. And I always get a bit of resistance, but I think I'm going to give you some examples, and I hope that you will agree with me. So first of all, thinking about opening minds and challenging beliefs, I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories about two of my students. I'm sure you all have had similar stories, similar moments in your teaching careers. These are a couple of particularly interesting ones. I'm going to start off with Ali. So Ali was a Libyan. Oh, by the way, I've changed the names of all of the students involved. Ali was a Libyan student in an intermediate class, a very mixed nationality class, and some of his classmates were Asian. There were some Chinese students, some Thai students. And he was a very effervescent, very friendly, very chatty guy, and he liked to engage with everybody. And he started doing the Chinese eyes, and I'm not going to do it, but you all know what I mean, right? And making comments, kind of saying ni hao, and some quite racially offensive actions and comments. And I hauled him out of that class faster than he could blink. I said, Ali, that's not okay. You can't be doing that. It's completely unacceptable. You're making fun of their nationality. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean? Of course I'm not. I'm just joking. And I explained to him that, you know, it might be intended as a joke, but the result is actually it's quite offensive. And people could be quite upset by it. And he looked at me with horror and he said, teacher, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I was just making a joke. I just wanted to be funny. I'll apologize. And he went back to the class and he apologized to all of the students. And he said he was sorry, he didn't understand that it was rude, and he wanted to learn more about their culture and understand more about how he could behave appropriately. And he ended up becoming very, very close friends with a couple of the Chinese students. They taught him about Chinese cuisine. He cooked Libyan cuisine for them. I think they were probably better cooks than he was, but anyway, he made an effort. And it was incredible to see his mind completely change in his attitude towards these people who he had never met before. They'd never met Asian people before. So that was a really, really lovely moment. Another story, that's perhaps a slightly more amusing one, was the story of Sun. Sun was a Korean student that I had, about 10 years ago, I guess. And if you, looking at the pictures here, if you've ever been to London, you might recognize Heaven as a very famous gay club in London. One day, Sun came up to me and he said, listen, I really want to go to a gay club. Will I be allowed in? I said, well, of course you will, Son. There's no, as long as you're dressed appropriately and you're not too drunk, I'm sure they'll let you in. And so he and a couple of other students, they went to Heaven. And then the next day, or probably following Monday, I guess, they came back to class and they said, wow, it was amazing. They said, we'd never been around lots of gay people before. We didn't know how friendly they were. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about that story, but he had a fantastic time, and he wanted to experience that because he wanted to know more about gay culture, and particularly in an open city like London, because in Korea, particularly at that time, it was very difficult to even encounter gay culture if you were a non-gay person. By the way, I'm going to use gay as the sort of overarching word here, just because it's a bit easier. I hope that's all right for everyone. So those are just two examples of how students have had their beliefs challenged and their attitudes changed by their experiences in the UK. And in fact, just by being here, they're exposed to so many different cultures and examples of a tolerant society. And as I said, you know, they know what to expect when they come. And this is what they experience.
London is proud, loud, hard as nails, suited and booted, deep-rooted, undisputed. London is Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Sikh. Magnifique. London is European, grand, wild, magical, nuts. London is hungry guts. Late night bagels, all the curry verse. Avocado on toast, Sunday roast. London is non-stop, round the clock, grime and rap. Mind the gap. London is fearless, outrageous, courageous, spacious, expressive, impressive, the history, the future. London is anyone. London is everyone. London is open.
So who couldn't fail to be affected by seeing such a variety of people, of cultures, of experiences? And as I said before, that's what they come for. That's what they want to experience. And that's what we should help to give them. Ooh, sorry, I'm just trying to change. There we go. So as a part of that, and as I said before, one of the most important things is that they meet each other. It's not just what we as the teachers or as the host culture show them, but also what their classmates give them and how they exchange information with their classmates and exchange ideas. So again, I've just got a few examples here of some stories that I've come across during my career. And I'm going to start off with Sophia and Alexander's story. Now, this was a class, it was a summer school class of students from 16 and up, but the majority of them were 16 to about 19. So Alexander, I think, was 17. He was from Argentina. Sophia was 19, I believe, and she was from Russia. And I do a project with a lot of students called Humans of WSE. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Humans of New York blog, where this guy, I don't know his name, goes around New York and he takes portrait photos and he interviews people, but about quite fundamental emotional issues, not just about, you know, what's your favorite color and how many brothers and sisters do you have. So I emulate this, I do this in class with my students, and I put these two together. And what happened, completely unplanned, was that they both used the opportunity to share their coming out stories. I didn't know they were both gay. I just put them together because I thought they would be a good match. And so they told each other their coming out stories, and Sophia very bravely and very kindly allowed us to publish it. I'm just going to share it with you. So hopefully you can see that. This is Sophia. And she is a teenager from Russia. And this was her coming out story. It's quite long. I'm just going to give you the gist of it. Basically, she came out, she realized she was gay. She started seeing a girl, but the girl's parents found out, prevented them from seeing each other. Her family were also very angry with her. And so she's really struggled as a gay young person in Russia. And so if we look at just the last kind of couple of sentences here, the reason she became so inspired when she came to London and saw all the gay flags and expressions of liberty and equality everywhere, because she could be herself. Now, that was amazing. And to be honest, I had a tear in my eye during class when they talked about this. And they both were happy to stand at the front of the class and talk about their stories and exchange their stories. But what was so magical about this was not just how those two students were able to feel free, but how the rest of the class, with a huge variety of nationalities, including students from countries who you might expect to be far more conservative, were overwhelmingly supportive of both of them and hugely proud that the students had felt comfortable enough with them to share such personal stories. And I think that's a really great example of how we perhaps underestimate our students sometimes in their readiness to accept differences. And I'm going to talk about that again a little bit more later on. But I think it was a really wonderful example of students showing just how good they can be. You know what I mean? Like the possibilities of who they could be. Another one, perhaps a more fun example, was Uncle Kim. So I had a group of, I think they were Swiss and Belgian and Dutch teenagers. And I have to say, we talk a lot about racism in ELT, particularly among students. And the worst racism that I've ever seen is targeted at Asian students. They're by far the most commonly targeted, both within the school and outside the school. So this was a particularly interesting story for me. So there were these 5 teenagers, and they were quite arrogant, and they were very good at English. They were all in a C2 level proficiency class, and they thought they were the big I am. They knew it all. And then a 65-year-old Korean man joined the class, and at first I was quite worried. I thought, God, how's this going to work? And do you know what? It was amazing. They took him to their hearts. They called him Uncle Kim, and they would use him as a fount of wisdom and knowledge for everything that came up in class. They would refer to him. Now, what would you do, Uncle Kim? What about in Korean culture? What would happen in Korean culture? And they were fascinated, and they sucked as much information from him as possible. And they wanted to know everything about how he'd grown up, about beliefs that he'd grown up with, the culture and the history. And you know, one of them said to me once when he wasn't there, I said, "Wow, I enjoyed this class before, but with Uncle Kim, it's just something amazing." And again, it's such a beautiful example of just different cultures coming together and promoting understanding of each other. The last one I'm going to share is Ibrahim's story, which is a little bit different perhaps. So Ibrahim was a Saudi teenager, and the topic of gay people in general came up in class. And there was another Saudi lady in the class who was a little bit older. She was in her 50s, and she was a business owner. She was very strong woman. And she said, we don't have any gay people in Saudi Arabia. It's not something we have. It's a Western thing." And Ibrahim started falling about laughing. And she looked at him. She said, "Ibrahim, what's the matter? Why are you laughing so much?" He said, "You should have been in my school." He said, "I went to a boarding school. There weren't any girls around, but certainly a lot of the guys were pretty intimate with each other." And she was astonished. She had no idea that these things happened in her country. So here was an example of students from the same culture learning from each other because they were in a safe environment and a safe space where they were able to do that. So that's 3 different examples of how international friendships and positive examples can really help to change people's minds or to shape the way that they think about people and about the world. Something my dad always says, he grew up in Greece and then in East Africa. He lived in Kenya and Tanzania for many years, where there was, particularly in the 50s and 60s, where there was a lot of prejudice and a lot of discrimination. And something he always says is that it's almost impossible to feel prejudice and bigotry towards somebody when you've looked into their eyes and shared a cup of tea with them. When you have that personal touch, those barriers tend to break down. And that's really what we're doing. We're breaking down those barriers of prejudice by exposing students to a huge, wondrous variety. But maybe the most important change, or the most important thing, is the actual exporting of tolerance, where students take new attitudes home with them. It's been proven, as we can see in the quote here, that attitudes to social issues change from the top down. They start off in the well-educated, well-traveled middle classes, in the elites, and they spread into the rest of society. And that's our target audience. That's our target market. Well-educated, well-off young people. These are exactly the kind of people that will change their societies. And we're helping to do that. So again, a couple of examples I've got here. One is another Saudi example. This is a young chap called Saud. And he had been to an international school. So he was very well educated, but very liberally educated as well for a Saudi kid. And the issue of women driving came up, Saudi women driving. And we had a few other Saudi students in the class as well. And he said, "Do you know what I realized? I'm a feminist. I want to stand in solidarity with my Saudi sisters and support them in their struggle. And I think everyone should." And he started basically talking to and convincing the other Saudi students in the class that they should also support women's struggle for the right to drive and many other issues. And he said, you know, I'm going to take these attitudes back. I'm going to tell people in Saudi what I've learned here and how positive, you know, more open society can be. And that was his expressly stated aim, was to go back and make his country a better place. And I've heard many students reflect that aim, that hope throughout the years. I think for a lot of students, that's why they want to come and get again, I'm going to say a liberal Western education, because they want to experience this fair, equal society that we live in. Another example, perhaps a more lighthearted one, is Mariana and Carolina. So I've been talking a lot about LGBT issues and also about issues of race, but this is more about issues of gender. So Mariana and Carolina were from Colombia, and they were staying in Kilburn, I think it was. And one day, it was quite late at night, and they were kind of tired. They were in their pajamas, but they wanted ice cream. And so they went downstairs in their pajamas to the shop, and they bought some ice cream. And they told me about it the next day, like, "Oh my God, we did this." I said, "Why? That's great, but why are you so excited about it?" They said, "You don't understand. In Colombia, to step outside the front door, we should be wearing perfect makeup. We should have the most perfectly worked out outfit, because we feel that if we don't do that, we're going to be judged. People are going to look at us and judge us for not making an effort. And they said, after being in London, we realized that's not important. Just because I'm a woman, I don't have to wear full makeup every day. I don't have to go out in heels every day. If I want to wear tracksuit trousers to go to the shop, I can do that. I don't have to be confined by gender norms so much anymore. And it's a small thing, but I think it's a really important thing as well. So taking new attitudes home with them, I think is really what we're hoping happens. We're trying to get these students to understand the context of the wider world, and to take those attitudes home with them, and hopefully start to change their societies a little bit. Gosh, I'm really running out of time here. So, so that's why, and that's what happens. But what can we do about it? I think there are four things to look at here. A lot has been discussed about how, as teachers, as educators, we can raise issues, we can highlight them, we can draw attention to them, whether we do it explicitly through directly addressing them in class, integrally, through our use of materials, for example. Those are the two main areas that are discussed. But I also think we need to do two more things. We need to lead by example, by creating an environment, an atmosphere of inclusion and a safe space, and by action. So let's have a look at some of these. Firstly, the explicit approach. Now, it's pretty risky raising very controversial issues with a class. You really need to know your class, but it's probably the most effective way. Most students jump at the chance to talk about something a bit meaty. They want to discuss it. They want to explore different topics. I've just put a quote here from an article by Tekin from 2011, talking about an experiment of discussing controversial subjects within a Turkish classroom within Turkey. So this was a homogenous group. And perhaps against expectations, or maybe not against expectations, the vast majority of students really wanted to talk about the two subjects that they raised were homosexuality and adultery, or sex outside marriage, I think even was not even adultery. So those two topics. And they're both very taboo in Turkish society, certainly at that time. And yet the students were hungry to talk about them, and they hugely appreciated the opportunity to discuss these issues in a safe space and without perhaps the judgment of society or of other people within their community, and to talk about it with people who have perhaps different ideas. So it can be risky. Many teachers feel that it's not their role to raise these issues in the class, but it actually enhances the class a lot. And I think particularly if you set it up carefully as a debate, the teacher is, a very active facilitator, it can be one of the most effective ways of raising issues. The other way that's commonly talked about is the integral method, where we normalize diversity. So rather than explicitly raising awareness or drawing attention to the topics, we incorporate them. We use examples that have same-sex families. In photos, we have a wide variety of different ethnicities and races, rather than just your middle-class white people, with levels of wealth, people from poorer backgrounds, rather than just middle-class people. By normalizing this diversity, that's our aim, isn't it? That's the ultimate aim. So I guess there's a lot to be said for this method as well. And certainly both should be used in conjunction, I believe. The great thing about this is, particularly recently, there's been a huge number of independently produced resources. Now, we're all aware of the publisher issue, and I think this has been discussed previously in the conference, certainly in every conference I've been to. Publishers don't like to use controversial material. They're worried about their sales. Fine, okay, we don't just have to use published materials, we can use our own materials, we can find independent materials. One which I particularly like is a book called Raise Up, which I've totally forgotten the authors of, but I can share that later on. But it's a book which it talks about lots of different typical areas, but the examples used are much more diverse than you find in your average course book. And I think that's, as teachers, that's our responsibility. I think we can't blame the publishers for not producing what we want. If we want something, we need to produce it ourselves, or we need to source it ourselves. and that's certainly something we're all capable of doing. So those are the two typically talked about methods, but I think, as I said, there's a couple of other issues. We should be setting an example, and particularly in making the classroom a safe space where students can be whoever they want to be. I'm going to share 3 stories about 3 trans students that I've had over the years, and I've put the years there so you can see the change in attitude. So first of all, Mark, I was working in a school with a residential, summer residential program, and obviously we've had students staying together in rooms, girls together, boys together. And we had a girl contact us quite distraught, and she said, I don't know why I'm sharing a room with a boy. Okay, we checked the manifesto and double checked, no, she's definitely booked in to share with a girl. Maybe someone had been put in the wrong room, we double checked, no. Turned out the person that she was sharing the room with was actually a trans boy, but his parents completely refused to acknowledge it. They refused to acknowledge that it was anything other than what they described as a phase, which I'm sure is a really common issue. So we were a bit puzzled. We didn't know what to do. And eventually we thought, well, that's who he is. Mark is who he is. So he's going to be Mark. And we put him in a single room so there wasn't an issue of sharing. And for the duration of his stay with us, he was Mark. And he was treated as a boy, as a young man. He was 16. And at the end of the time, he came to me and he said that he appreciated it so much because it was the first time he'd felt able to truly be himself. And we'd given him that opportunity. And he was going to go home and, emboldened with that experience, make sure that he was able to study and work and live in an environment where he could still continue to be himself. But there was, as I mentioned, that initial bit of prejudice, particularly from his parents. A few years later, I had a student, now this is about a trans girl called Emma Luna, but she only transitioned after she left the school that I was working in. And before she left, she came to me as her previous self and she said, I've had the most amazing time here because, and again, my experiences in London have allowed me to explore who I am and to understand truly who I am and make the changes that I need to make to be happy. Emma Luna is now a very happy, very out and proud trans woman living in Paris. And it's amazing to see the journey that she's taken. And finally, we've got Victor. And Victor was just last year, a young Polish trans boy. And again, he came to us, but this time with the blessing of his parents. His parents contacted us and they said, look, you'll see on his passport that it's a girl's name. But Victor is trans, he's our son, and we would appreciate you treating him as such. And in class, the students, and in fact, in Mark's situation as well, but particularly in Victor's, students could not have cared less. They just accepted Victor for who he was, with his slightly flamboyant clothing sense, which was quite fabulous. Yeah, it was just wonderful to see him being completely included in the class and to be treated just like everyone else. And I think we underestimate our students quite often when we don't expect them perhaps to react so well. And then finally, we can take action. Now, as a director of studies, I'm in a position to act at a school level rather than at a class level. So I can actively hire diverse staff. I make a point of trying to ensure that we have a good balance of diversity of different types of people working in the school. And also of students, you know, trying to encourage perhaps students from different countries than we normally would have them from. And I can also ensure that we highlight the culture of diversity. We might do a special on Pride Month, do an excursion to a Pride event. We might do in fact, we did just recently have a focus on Black History Month and really highlight to students that this is an essential part of the culture that they're learning about. It's not a sideline, it's an integral part of what it means to be, or what British culture, for example, means. And further than that, to encourage cultural exchange, to make sure that students are continually learning from each other. So not just in class, but to promote social activities like, I mean, I'm sure every school does the international parties, they're really valuable for people to learn about each other. And finally, to incorporate cultural awareness into course design, into training, to highlight it in CPD sessions, to really make sure that it's a focus of the school. And that's something I feel fortunate to be able to do. So we've seen why it's important. I'm really running out of time here. We've seen why it's important. We've seen what the effect is, and I hope you'll agree with me that I think it's a really positive effect. And we've seen how we can do it. And I'd just like to end on a positive message here. Things are getting better. You know, it's easy, as I said, to be disheartened. It's easy to see all the hate crimes, the discrimination that happens, particularly in places like the States, perhaps, where we seem to be losing ground. But I think it's really important to notice or to recognize that overall, the world is improving. It's becoming a better place. And I really wanted to show you a UN video about this, but I don't think I've got time. So I will just move on to some more statistics. So I don't remember the exact statistics. It's in the video, but a huge number of countries have instituted anti-discrimination laws. Many more countries have introduced gay marriage, or certainly protections for gay people or partnerships. So we're moving in the right direction. And I think we're a part of that. Attitudes are changing. As I said before, those with more education or younger people have more liberal attitudes than their parents. They're more accepting of diversity. As we can see here, there's quite a dramatic difference between more and less education and between older and younger people. And society's changing as we have more freedom of movement. Sadly, another reason is the terrible refugee crises that are all around the world. But a result of this is that societies are becoming more diverse. Along with more rights and anti-discrimination laws, gender equality is increasing around the world. It's getting better. We are improving, and we can be part of that change. We can make a difference. So I really do want to end with this video, which I think, or I hope will highlight that we can do something about it. We shouldn't just sit back and complain about the situation that we find ourselves in, but take action and be a part of the change that we want to see. And if we do that, if we highlight positivity, we can make a difference. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Ah! Promise this will work. So I really want to kind of end on a positive note and say, as I said, it is getting better. Things are improving. The world is changing, and we can be a part of that. And I think it's indeed our duty, not just to recognize that, but to be a part of the change, not a part of the resistance. We should be the change we want to see, in that very cliched phrase. So I hope that you've found something positive in this. I really believe that we can make a difference, and I hope that we will all continue to do so, and that this issue continues to be spoken about and becomes more visible in the future. Just the references for the images and quotes. And that's it.
Lovely stuff. Thank you so much, Jo. What a fantastic way to end the conference, with a really uplifting message, and I think some really nice videos there to illustrate all the different things you were talking about. We've got a little bit of time now for some questions, if anyone has any that they would like to put into the chat. I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the chat, Jo, but you were mentioning, yeah, it's all right, no worries. You were mentioning Raise Up. We've got one of the Raise Up authors here with us. James Taylor is here with us, and we've shared the link in the chat there for anyone that is interested in looking at up those materials. And I think Sergio is presenting at the same time as you, is also one of the authors.
Yeah, so James, thank you. That's such a fantastic resource. And actually, it was your talk at IATEFL maybe 2 years ago that kind of inspired me to look a little bit more into this issue. So thanks a lot.
I haven't seen any questions as yet, so please do pop them in there if you have any. In the meantime, I'm going to just ask a quick question. So I work a lot with early career teachers. I'm a CELTA trainer, but also many of the more experienced teachers that I work with are just really concerned about touching on some of these topics that you've talked about, topics that they might perceive as controversial, topics that concern tolerance and intolerance. How do we build the confidence of these teachers, do you think, in bringing these issues into their work?
I think that's the really key thing, isn't it? We have to have the confidence to be able to raise them in class and to feel that we can manage the conversation. And I think probably the best way that I've experienced is by having very structured debates, to the point where you're giving points of view to different groups to discuss and to research. So it doesn't have to be their point of view. And that's, that's also looking at 21st century skills. It's encouraging critical thinking. It's encouraging considering other viewpoints. And I find that if you take that personalness away from it, that they're looking at kind of more theoretical ideas, it enables them to explore it a little bit more without kind of that, it reaching that sort of, it's such a touch point issue, you know what I mean, that people find it less kind of emotive if they're not talking about their own opinions perhaps, but the opinions of other people. So that's one way. But actually I find more and more students are desperate to talk about it. They really want to, and they will police each other in many cases. That's what I touched on about why are we just focusing on these students that are that we're worried about, that we're worried about upsetting them. But we've got lots of other students in the class from cultures where it's perfectly okay to discuss gender, sexuality, race, and what does it say about us to them if we're not doing it? So I think we really need to remember that as well, that it's not just those students that might get offended. And if they do, they'll probably be shouted down by the rest of the class.
Yeah, that's the end goal, isn't it? That's the aim, is that the students will take control of those conversations and bring them up themselves, feel confident and happy doing so, but also police the conversation in a way that is kind of inclusive of everybody, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the structuring it makes it really important that it's not just a free-for-all debate, but you're, as the teacher, managing the inputs if it's particularly a controversial issue. Yeah,
and I guess also, of course, bringing in materials like the ones that we've already mentioned. Anyone else got any questions that they would like to put to Jo?
Someone's mentioned here, thanks for recognising and valuing Mark in a way his family wouldn't. Yeah, I think that's really important. Again, that's part of our role is, for so many of these students that do come from places where they're not able to be themselves, Mark, but also Sophia, it's so important for them to have that space where they feel that, even if their families don't understand them, even if their home cultures don't, at least we do, at least when they're with us, they can be who they are. And I've had so many students over the years who've kind of come up to me and said, it's incredible to be in London because I can be myself. It's incredible to be in this classroom, in this school, because I can be myself.
They were really moving stories, the ones you shared. I think that, I've said this earlier today, but this is a big theme of this conference, is a sharing of stories, both of teachers and of our students, and encouraging that. I don't think we have any other questions. So all I would like to do, all that remains then, is to give you a big virtual round of applause. Thank you very much again, Jo, for being with us, and thank you for being our final speaker of the conference in Tent B. It's been really, really great to have you here with us. So thank you very much.